Hi, beautiful. I'm so excited about our episode today. I have a fabulous expert who has lots and lots of experience to share with you all about mediation, hostility, and emotions. Boy, isn't that a loaded topic. Her name is Ellice Halpern, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about her background because it's so extensive. I don't want her to have to sit there quietly while I tell you all about it. So, hi, Elise, welcome. And
Hey, thank you.
I'm so excited to have you. Could you tell everybody a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Buffalo, went to Cornell and Georgetown Law School, started off working in the executive branch, and then I went over to the U.S. Senate and worked for Ted Stevens, a senator from Alaska. And then I had three kids. I worked as a lobbyist for the American Medical Association. And then with three kids, I really wanted control over my schedule. And so I became a mediator about 13 years ago. Started off
Wow.
doing court referred mediations to get lots of experience. Then I taught law school for 8 semesters and learned so much. And I also started about 8.5 years ago my own mediation practice, Little Falls Mediation.
Cool. Do you find that a lot of people don't know what mediation is?
Yes, yes. In fact, they think it's meditation. Yeah, I even have Little
Yeah.
Falls Mediation t-shirts that I made when I started my practice, and people will look at me and say, "Oh, you're a meditator."
Oh, wow. Well, you could probably combine the two.
Yes, yes. I need to be disciplined about my meditation. I find that
Yes.
very difficult. Yes.
Me too. Me too. I agree with you. So tell me a little bit about what mediation is and how does the process work if it works the way it's supposed to. Let's put it that way.
Yes. Well, I think the most important thing about mediation is that even though I'm a lawyer, my legal hat is off and I am a neutral mediator. And
Okay.
my job is to empower the parties to have control over the process and the outcome. And there are four prongs to mediation. Number one,
Okay.
identify the issues, like a grocery list.
Okay.
Number two, pick an issue, brainstorm all kinds of options. Number three, evaluate those options by asking questions and reality testing. Number four, come to a joint decision on that issue and then go to the next issue on the list. So that's it in a nutshell.
Wow. So how would you know if you picked a great mediator versus a not so great mediator?
That's a really good question. I actually wrote a blog post on that called
Yeah.
something like it's on my website, something like 5 tips for choosing a mediator. So
Well,
I
let's put
usually,
that in the show notes. I think that would be really
yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah, it's actually one of my most read blog tips.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote it so long ago, I'm trying to remember what I said. So one thing, one thing I said is I happen to be certified by the Virginia Supreme Court,
Okay.
and not all states have a certification process. And because I'm certified by the Virginia Supreme Court, I get recertified every 2 years, which means I do a lot of training, which I really
Okay.
enjoy. Mediator training makes me a better mediator. And we do it collaboratively with other mediators. So it's actually a lot of fun, although it's a little bit nerve-wracking because you're put on the spot, you're doing role plays. Ethics is important, addressing emotions is important. There are all kinds of different trainings. So, in terms of how do you know what the best mediator is, number one is you might want to say, are you certified by any state entity? So that might be number one.
Right. Gotcha.
Number two might be, are you comfortable talking with this person?
Mm-hmm.
Is this person kind? Does this person have what you're looking for? My particular brand is rapid response,
Mm-hmm.
kindness, and competence. But for someone looking for a mediator, kindness might not be important. To me, it is. But to
Right.
other people, it may be, hey, you know what? We just want you to be a good numbers person
Right.
and just help us with the numbers. So it depends what you're looking for. But if you're looking for kindness, rapid response, and competence, that would be me. So everyone looks
Okay.
for something different. Just like if you're
Gotcha.
shopping for a doctor or a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
shopping for a dress, you're not going to buy the first dress necessarily.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I suggest to my clients that they interview two or three to so that they have something to compare to and their gut feel can tell them. And I also give them kind of a list of questions to check out. I recently got certified in pre-mediation coaching, which is
Nice.
the whole goal is to help the mediator by taking a lot of the pressure off, and then the mediator can be as successful as possible,
Hmm.
particularly on the emotional end and the preparation end and that kind of thing. So I've had a lot of fun with that.
Hmm.
But I also have clients that have dealt with different personality types in mediation.
Yes, yes.
How do you handle that? I know one of my clients was worried that the mediator wouldn't be able to see through the husband's bad behavior.
I hear that a lot. I do these pre-mediation, no charge confidential phone consults
Okay.
separately with each party. And I
Oh,
hear that a
okay.
lot from either of the parties.
Right.
My wife or my husband is so charming and is going to charm the pants off of you. But
Right.
really, he or she is a narcissist, and I'm worried you're not going to see that. So I hear that a lot. And
Right.
one thing I'll say is I learn a lot in these phone consults, these pre-mediation, no charge, confidential phone consults. And after I do these phone consults, I then send clients 4 forms, one of which is a confidential intake form where they can tell and share with me anything that they want me to know. And really, the form is more for them because it gets them
Mm-hmm.
thinking about their goals, fears, and challenges for mediation.
Yep.
But it also gives me more of that kind of information before we even get into mediation. So, to address a difficult personality, I've that's where this training comes back into play.
Right.
So
Right.
not only do mediators do a lot of training, but there are certain trainings I've done that really do help me address difficult personality types. One is Bill Eddy, EDDY.
He is going to be a guest on my podcast. I read every one of his books. He
He's
is
fantastic.
he is the penultimate expert in hostile personalities and how to
He
deal with
is.
them.
He calls them
Yes.
high conflict. And in a
Yes.
nutshell, I trained with him in DC. I trained with him in San Diego. I trained with him in Virginia. I've seen him at all the family mediator conferences I used to go to before the pandemic. A lot of them are still remote. So Bill has really his career is fascinating. I'll just briefly tell you he was a kindergarten teacher, a social worker,
Yes.
a therapist, a lawyer, and a mediator. He's got it
Uh-huh.
all. And
Yes.
he's got specific tactics in many of his books. One of my favorites is called So, What's Your Proposal?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm dealing with a difficult personality, or as Bill calls it, a high conflict personality, rather than kind of paraphrasing and summarizing a lot of emotions, which will not work with a high conflict personality, according to
Right.
Bill, you make it all about the proposal. So make a proposal,
Very
and then the other
factual.
person, right, the other person can say, yes, no, I'll think about it. If the person says no, that person makes a counter proposal back. And so you're negotiating, you're making
Mm-hmm.
proposals, you're leaving the emotion out of it to the extent that you can. The other person who has been very helpful to me, used a lot of his work when I was teaching law school, is William Ury, Ury, from the
Mm-hmm.
Harvard Program on Negotiation. And he and Roger Fisher wrote Getting to Yes, which is kind of the Bible on negotiation.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And he speaks a lot in his books about interest-based negotiation. And so those two uh, methods, both Bill
Mm-hmm.
Eddy and Bill Ury, have helped me a lot with whether we call the personality difficult, because we can all be situationally difficult or strategically difficult, right? Or whether it's a high conflict personality, which Bill Eddy will say is really someone with a personality disorder, and many of us have personality disorders. But
Sure.
both of the works of both of them really have helped me in sort of preparing for a case and also in mediating a case and helping the
Mm-hmm.
parties. Again, my job is to empower the parties to negotiate with each other, not just in mediation, but after they're finished with mediation too.
Absolutely. And, you know, I was thinking about another question that I've heard from clients is that they're so worried that they will be so upset that they won't be able to stand up for themselves and the emotion. And that's actually one of the things I do as a coach is I
Mm-hmm.
prepare them to manage those emotions. And just like you said,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
goal to me is making this a business-like transaction, to put those emotions aside during that session and
Mm-hmm.
view it as a neutral business transaction. That's not easy, but
It's
it can
not.
be done. It can be done.
So what I find is that in that pre-mediation call, sometimes people will say, "Oh, there won't be any emotion. We're completely amicable."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always say to them, "Hey, you know what? As a mediator, I'm trained to address emotion. As a lawyer, I was not." And I will
Right.
say to them, because, when you get into mediation, people who think there will be no emotion, there is, because we're humans, we're not machines. I'll say to them, the most common emotions I see are grief, anger, fear, and loss. And what we do in mediation is we acknowledge the emotion because that empowers the parties. It
Hmm.
creates a legitimate sense of control and fairness. And it also creates the opportunity to preserve the relationship. So mediation does not look like therapy. I always say this to people. It does not look like therapy,
Neither
but we
does
don't,
coaching. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we don't ignore the emotion. We'll pause. We may
Hmm.
even take a break to get a drink and just to get a tissue. So, and then I do allow people to choose if they want to keep going, and usually they
Hmm.
do. I mean, I would say 99.9% of the time they do want to go. I'm thinking of one case where the party's mom had just fallen, and
Oh,
it turned out she took an ambulance to the hospital and died. And I'm so glad that in that case, I said, let's stop mediation. Let's just stop.
yes.
And he wanted to keep going. And I said, no, I think we should stop. Thank God we
Yeah.
did
You
that.
can't think clearly. Yeah.
No, I just had a gut feeling. So, in
Yes.
that kind of case, we stop. But typically, if someone is emotional, I'll give them an option. And people really, really like that we're not going to ignore the emotion, but nor are we having a therapy session. We're just going to acknowledge the presence and move on.
What about there are mediators that are mediators, and there are mediators that have also been trained as attorneys? What
Hmm.
are your opinions of those two distinctions?
Well, and it's interesting because I am an attorney. I am trained as an attorney. And
Hmm.
when I started off doing my training as a mediator, I noticed that the people having the hardest time with our role plays in terms of acknowledging, summarizing, paraphrasing, reframing, the litigators had the toughest time. The litigators tended
Hmm.
to, in the role plays, be kind of pummeling the other party with questions. Isn't it a fact? Isn't it a
Yes.
fact that?
Yes,
And
yes, yes.
mediators need to use open-ended questions. Help me understand. Tell me about this. And so my trainings would be composed of HR people and social workers and therapists who all did a really great job at our role plays. And for litigators, it was a little bit difficult. For me, I was never a litigator, and I was a
Hmm.
psychology, a developmental psychology major. So I kind of wanted to be a therapist, but instead I went to law school. I think
Hmm.
for me, those role plays were not, I'm not going to say they were easy, but I wasn't responding to them like a litigator was because of my
Right.
developmental psychology background.
But I bet they were awesome training.
Yes, yes, the
Yes.
training is amazing. Yeah,
Yes.
very, very
I,
different than going to law school. Law school education and mediator training is night and day. Mediator training is wonderful,
hmm.
warm, and I just felt so at home in mediator training, whereas in law school, I had to put on a persona. You know, even teaching law school, I had to put on a persona. Professor Halpern, who was she? Wait, you call me Professor Halpern? Oh, that's me.
Yes, I want when you say Professor Halpin, I kind of go into my college mindset of, oh, I'm going to scoot down in my chair right now. Um, is there anyone or any situation that should not go to mediation?
I'm thinking of a couple.
Okay.
So, a cornerstone of mediation is disclosure and
Right.
confidentiality, and it's
Mm-hmm.
voluntary. So those three cornerstones. Disclosure is a cornerstone. And so when you fill out those financial worksheets, let's say you're getting a divorce, before you even get to mediation, that's one of the four forms I send along with that confidential intake form. I
Right.
send the financial worksheet, and they can fill them out together or separately. And it goes through your bank accounts, your investment accounts, your retirement accounts, your personal property, your real property, your income, your health insurance. And so if someone doesn't want to share that financial worksheet, because I pull them up in mediation, or if we're meeting in
Right.
person, we share them. If someone doesn't want to share that information, you're not a candidate for mediation. So that happened
Right.
in one case years ago, you know, even despite our pre-mediation consults and even with the forms they filled out, when it came right down to it, the husband wanted to punish the wife because she had decided she wanted the divorce. And
Right.
he said, well, I'm not sharing the financial. She was a PhD. He was a lawyer.
Right.
And she had a 1 year old, a 2 year old, and a 3 year old. And so he had become in charge of the finances. He said, well, I'm not sharing anything with you because, I don't want this divorce. Well, I had to say, you know what? I don't want to waste your money. This is a cornerstone, as you know, of mediation, financial disclosure. If you're not going to disclose this information, I'm going to tell you what the other options are for you. And I outlined other forms of alternative dispute resolution for them.
So litigation isn't the only option in that
Right,
case.
right. So there's,
Because
I'm a,
because
go
because
ahead.
one thing I heard that's a big distinction between mediation and litigation is that in mediation your information is confidential, but in litigation your information can be public record. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Okay.
But there are things, think of a ladder, the
Okay.
ladder of dispute resolution. There are things between mediation and litigation, which most of my clients don't know. There's something called evaluative mediation, which retired judges do here in Virginia. I'm a facilitative mediator. In Virginia, Supreme Court certified mediators are facilitative.
Okay.
Evaluative mediators may be a retired judge who can say, well, when I was on the bench, this is how I would have ruled. They evaluate the
Okay.
case. I wasn't a retired judge. I don't practice evaluative mediation. Okay. Then there's
Gotcha.
arbitration, where the parties hire an arbitrator. There's no appeal right in arbitration. And even if the arbitrator makes a mistake, the decision is final. The arbitrator will write an arbitrator opinion or an arbitration award. And a lot of people like arbitration because it is done in a conference room of their own choosing. It's not in a
Right.
public situation like a courtroom. I think sometimes people are nervous because the award is final with no appeal right. So there's arbitration, but it may preserve relationships. It may be a little bit more dignified. It may cost
Mhm.
less money. And then there may be a legal conference where the lawyers talk, the parties don't. And then at the top of that ladder would be litigation, which is public,
Right.
it's time
Nasty.
consuming, it does not preserve relationships, it's expensive, it's time
Right.
consuming. And so that's sort of what I call the ladder. And at the very, very bottom is negotiation. And then the second rung from the bottom would be mediation, where you pull in your neutral mediator. So it's really an entire ladder of dispute resolution.
So, in terms of mediation, if I understand the contrast, in mediation, the couple is really making the decisions. But in arbitration, it's the arbitrator who's making the final decision. Is that
That is
correct?
such an important point, and that's the point that I emphasize over and over.
Okay.
You have control in mediation. You are experts on your own family and your own situation. Don't give away your control. You have control over the process and the outcome. If you go to arbitration, who has control? The arbitrator has control over the process and the outcome. And so when people are having trouble on a sticky issue and they say, oh, this is so hard, we're going to let the judge decide. I say, well, remember, you have control here. Why would you give
Right.
your control to someone you don't know if the judge is male or female, divorced or never married, Jewish
Right.
or Catholic, kids or no kids? You know nothing about this person. People will say, "Oh, okay, okay, you're right. We'll work at this again."
What do you say to the person that says the process should be fair? The result should be fair. My result wasn't fair.
So that's a really good question because I try to really focus on what are the best interests of the children, right? If there
Mm-hmm.
are children involved, let's focus on the best interests of the children. Um, I try to focus on the process. And when people say, I want something that's fair, help me to understand what that means, I'll say. So
Okay.
if they say something like, well, I worked really hard and I know the marital period is from date of marriage to date of separation. I know we need to split these assets under Virginia law because Virginia is an equitable distribution state. But I really don't want to do that. I don't really feel that's fair. I really feel like I should keep everything.
Right.
And I'll say, well, in mediation, you have the flexibility that you don't have in court, right? Because in court, a judge is going to order something. And here in mediation, you can negotiate what's going to work
Right.
best for the two of you. So that's sort of how I will respond to a, well, this isn't fair that I have to split my retirement or I have to split this or I have to split that. So we'll we'll talk about negotiating and we'll talk about, help me to understand
Gotcha.
what are your priorities? Let's talk about the issues. And so then we get to, we'll always focus, especially with kids, because not all my mediations involve children. What's the best interest of the children? So I always turn
Right.
the focus back to them. But it's a
Absolutely.
difficult concept when people, are saying this has to be fair. Well, help me to understand, what does that mean to you? What does fairness mean to you?
Right.
And then we'll find that the parties agree on way more than they disagree on. Well, we want the children to be able to take violin and play soccer. Yet we want to support
Right.
them in their goals and their dreams. So we get away from that fairness question in terms of, okay, let's talk about your goals for mediation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What about domestic violence situations? Are they appropriate for mediation?
That's a really, really good question. So I part of those intake forms that we talked about that I always send to people before we meet, part of that is a screening for domestic violence. And
Yes, I have that too.
so,
Yeah.
right. So it's really important to screen for domestic violence to understand what's going on. It's not always appropriate, but there are times if people want to move forward with mediation, and typically that's when a Zoom mediation really comes in handy because
Mm-hmm.
people may be in different states.
Right.
And a mediator can caucus and have the parties in different mediation rooms so they don't have to see each other. So
Right.
mediation can be a tool that's used in situations of domestic violence, but in terms of abuse, I've had a call where some child abuse, sexual abuse was alleged, and I immediately referred them to a lawyer because I thought
Right.
that the lawyer would be able to help them in a better way than mediation
Yeah.
could.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. Now, do you said you're in Virginia. Do you
Mhm.
practice outside of Virginia?
I do. So for years, I did court referred mediations in Virginia and then exclusively in DC through a program called Multidor, which is in DC courts. And there were divisions in Multidor. There was tax, there was civil, child protection, family, small claims. And I worked in three different divisions. Um, one, uh, one was small claims, which was any claim
Mm-hmm.
under 10,000. So you never knew what kind of a case you were going to get.
Right.
One was family. And then one was judge and chambers, which dealt with temporary restraining orders. So I did that for about 10 years until the pandemic hit. And so I do get a lot of calls now for DC cases, which I do.
Mm-hmm.
And even Maryland cases. I'm a member of the Maryland Bar, the Maryland State
Mm-hmm.
Bar. I
Okay.
tend to do more Virginia cases and DC cases and fewer Maryland cases.
Okay. Okay. That's so interesting. Let's see. I asked you about the mediator and oh, what about this concept of shuttle mediation, going into different rooms? I had a client that, oh, and then the question of should you have an attorney present with you for each party while they're in mediation with you?
Okay, so let's take one at a time. So shuttle
Okay.
mediation, we call a caucus,
Okay.
and that's when I can put parties in separate mediation rooms, either in person, which I did a lot of
Okay.
before the pandemic, or Zoom, which I do a lot since the pandemic. And I
Okay.
always offer at least one caucus per, if I'm meeting with a family for 2 sessions or 3 sessions, at least one caucus. They can say no, or they can
Mm-hmm.
ask for a caucus. The beauty of a caucus is that they can check in with me. I can check in with them just to make sure everybody's doing okay. And a
Okay.
lot of times with parents, I tend to keep parents together a lot because I
Mm-hmm.
want them to be able to negotiate everything related to their children after mediation. I tend to
Exactly.
get I tend to get people in and out of mediation pretty quickly. I One session on a parenting plan, one session on a division of assets and liabilities. Some parties like to mediate with me a lot. They want 5 sessions. But I like
Mm-hmm.
to save people money. So I like to get people in
Mm-hmm.
and out.
Right.
So in terms of caucusing, it's a good tool. I always offer it. If it's a case that doesn't address children, let's say it's a business partner dispute,
Okay.
they may want to be in caucus more, or they may want to be in caucus less. I always educate people about the option for using caucus. Now let's talk
Gotcha.
about bringing a lawyer in. So
Right.
I will always remind people, even though I'm a lawyer, I'm your neutral. I cannot give you legal advice. I can give you legal
Right.
information, like I can
Mm-hmm.
calculate child support. I walk that line.
Right. Okay.
And I'll always remind my parties, you have a right to consult with a lawyer at any time during mediation, or to review the agreement that I write before you sign it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all brainstorming, but when you sign it, it becomes a binding legal contract. So I'll always
Right.
remind people of this because a lot of people will say, thanks, Elise. We don't really like lawyers, but we appreciate you telling us that.
Okay.
So you certainly can have a lawyer with you in mediation. It doesn't happen very often because my client will have to pay the lawyer and will have to pay me, and the other party will have to pay the lawyer, so that we're talking 2 lawyers plus a mediator. It's always an option, and when it has happened, the lawyers are quiet and let me run the show. I manage the mediation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when that's happened, usually that kind of falls off. So if one session the parties have the lawyers there and the lawyers don't say anything,
Right.
um, and even say, hey, I'm going to get on a call, let me know, the lawyers will say to their clients, let me know if you need me. And so
Mm-hmm.
the my clients kind of realize, oh, it's not really that great to have a lawyer present
Uh-huh.
because I can always call the lawyer at any time during mediation, after mediation, right? So
Right.
it is something I will always remind clients because it's really important for them to remember that this is their right. And it is important for clients to have professionals that they can consult with, whether it's a lawyer, a divorce financial neutral, a tax person, a
Mm-hmm.
parenting coordinator who's a therapist, a real estate person. Sometimes it's really helpful to have professionals who can guide you along the way with your mediator.
Right.
So it's always okay to have a lawyer present. Most of my clients do not.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I saw or I heard of one in which it was actually the lawyers doing the talking, which actually turned more into what looked like almost a pseudo litigation on the way to a settlement because the
Hmm.
clients didn't talk, and then they ended up going to separate rooms, and the mediator would go back and forth between the attorneys. So I wondered, is that really mediation at all?
Remember we talked about evaluative mediation, which is what retired judges do?
Right.
That's what evaluative mediation looks like. Each party has a
Okay.
lawyer, and the evaluative mediator, who's a retired judge, will go back and forth between separate rooms. And I write the agreements as a facilitative mediator, but an evaluative mediator has the lawyers writing the agreements. So it's a different
Gotcha.
form of mediation. It works a little bit
Interesting.
differently. Hmm.
Gotcha. 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 This has been so fascinating. Absolutely. You are so incredibly knowledgeable. One of the things I like to ask all my guests before we leave is to offer 3 tips to our audience to help them along their divorce journey. Do you have anything you would suggest to them to keep in mind, or even to summarize what you've said already?
I do. I do. I don't know that this is summarizing what I said, but I would say find a mentor and be a mentor. That's number
Okay.
one. Okay. Um, Number two, I'm an information person. I
Okay.
like information. I like facts. I like to know things. So I would say empower yourself with information.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to those professionals we talked about who may be helpful, a real estate person, a therapist, a divorce financial neutral, or even a certified divorce financial analyst who would be your advisor. Whereas a divorce
Right.
financial neutral is the advisor is the
The
neutral
couple.
for
Mm-hmm.
the couple. So I would say empower yourself with information. It's very important. Ask questions. And then number three, I would say find your people, find your groups, find your activities that support your interests in your physical health and your mental health. You want to do a
Absolutely.
lot of self care. Take care of yourself and find your people.
Yeah. I think so many people ignore that part. And I saw some recent statistics about what happens to the health of men and women after divorce that was just appalling. And
Hmm.
part of it is the buildup of the stress that
Hmm.
drives it. So that's was so discouraging. And at least I know our listeners are going to have so many questions. How can they find you if they want to learn more?
Oh, thank you for asking. I would say look at my website, littlefallsmediation.com.
Okay.
Or email me. My email's on my website. It's Ellice Halpern it's Ellice at littlefallsmediation.com. That's right on my website.
Okay.
Or my phone number, which is 202-256-6428. That's on my website as well. So I would say look around my website because I'm always in there adding things. Um, I really like to, keep it updated with information because again, I'm an information person. I think information
Yeah,
empowers all of us. So I would say look around my
absolutely.
website. And in fact, I will always ask my potential clients to look at my website because I think they're going to get a lot more out of our pre-mediation calls if
Hmm.
they educate themselves about mediation before our calls. So I
Absolutely.
would I would say look at my website. And thank you, Beverly, for asking.
Oh, absolutely. Is there anything you'd like to share that I've forgotten to ask you?
Oh, you've been really comprehensive. I would say there's one more blog post that I wrote years ago that I would maybe check out because a lot of people are worried about money. People have
Okay.
fear. I would say check
Yes.
out my blog post on five financial tips when you're facing divorce.
Okay.
I remember once getting a phone call from someone who just said, I'm terrified. And that's what prompted me to write that blog post because I don't want people to be terrified. I want to
Right.
empower them with information so that they can move forward without fear.
Gotcha. Oh, so good. And to the audience, all of Elisa's information will be available in the show notes along with mine. And you can find them at herempowereddivorce.com on the podcast page or on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch our video version on our YouTube channel, Her Empowered Divorce. Thank you so much for being with Elise and myself on this episode of Her Empowered Divorce. I just love being with super knowledgeable divorce experts, and in particular, that are women, because I believe in women helping women. Join me for our next episode where I'll be diving deeper into what another expert professional can share to help you on your separation and divorce journey. Please share our story with your friends so we can reach out and help as many women as possible. Thank you for joining us today and stay empowered.